Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Y.A.L.E podcast.
Hello, everybody. Youth are largely evil here today. Welcome back to the Y.A.L.E podcast. I hope everyone's been having a good time. I hope everyone's been nice and safe. It seems though, if you live on the East Coast, that the weather is finally starting to pick up a little bit after that. Honestly, not that bad of a snowstorm as it was the last time, but still, the cold weather and everything. I'm not a cold weather guy. I need it to be warm. I'm not a fan of snow and ice, so I'm glad to see green grasses and potentially having like a little tinkling of spring, because believe me, it is much appreciated. And I want to thank you guys for stopping by to listen to this week's episode. This is probably going to be a more serious episode than I would usually like to have. But, recently the United States and Israel have all but actually declared war on Iran. We've been bombing Iran to smithereens. We took out the leadership. We pretty much completely decapitated Iran's leadership. I had mentioned this a little bit before on the previous podcast, but this is it, I guess. It did happen. We're going to have to talk a little bit about this. And really what my purpose of even starting this podcast is, I want to make sure that people who maybe are not as into politics as I am still have a thorough understanding of what's going on. And let me just say, obviously I'm one person, and I really, when it comes to current events, I wouldn't even necessarily call myself an expert. But I am someone who feels as though if I think I have an opinion about it, and I think the opinion is based on education, based on a good place coming from my heart, I'm going to share it. So there's never a time where my purpose is to really offend people with my takes on the podcast, on my YouTube channel, on anything. That's not my purpose. I have to talk about things that I just feel passionate about, and that's the whole point of me making this podcast. So with that being said, Iran, Israel, the United States, this conflict, I can't say war necessarily, because we are technically not at war. We've technically not been at war for a very long time, since about, I think, World War II was the last time we declared war. That might be incorrect, but for almost all conflicts, including the complete Vietnam War, we have not actually been at war, as war requires the Congress to actually vote in order to actually go to war. Everything has been military operations, including Iraq, Afghanistan. We kind of just can attack countries. The executive branch and the presidency kind of has the ability to just start what albeit looks like a war, but isn't actually considered a war. And so this is not technically a war, but let's be real, it is a war. The United States and Israel has declared war on Iran, a war that does not have a clear purpose or end goal, to be quite honest with you, because they've already said that it's not a regime change. In fact, there have been many people killed in these bombing ranges that could have potentially been the new Iranian regime. So what is it for? We don't quite know. But I wanted to just give people a little bit of a history of our relationship with Iran, and hopefully try to help people understand why this is happening right now and what could potentially be going on. The big narrative that we're going to be dealing with here, and potentially the biggest reason as an excuse for as to why we've decided to attack Iran, especially coming from Israel, is that Iran is on the verge of becoming a nuclear superpower. So a country that's able to have nuclear weapons. And that represents a inherent threat to the state of Israel, and really an inherent threat to all of Western civilization, really, because that's kind of what the argument is, that we cannot allow Iran to have nuclear weapons, because that is it's too dangerous. They're going to eradicate Israel because they're just a bunch of radical Muslims who hate Jews and yada, yada, yada. That is without a doubt, that is the biggest thing. That is the biggest lesson as to why we are able to attack Iran, or why we should be attacking Iran, is because we don't want them to become a nuclear power. Okay, so if you've been paying attention to that rhetoric that's been coming out of Washington and Tel Aviv, that's the same rhetoric that has been coming out of those places for the last 20 years. Okay, they've repeated, specifically Benjamin Netanyahu and specifically, Benjamin Netanyahu specifically has been saying that Iran was on the verge of being a nuclear power for literally decades. There's actually a video on YouTube that actually shows that he has been saying the verbatim thing that Iran is just a few months away from developing nuclear weapons since actually before I was born. I think the first time he said it was in 1996 or something like that. Okay. Iran is almost there. Iran is weeks away. Iran is on the verge of nuclear weapons. Okay. Now, if you actually step back and look at the geopolitical history of the region, then that picture gets a lot more complicated. One thing I want people to understand is that since the early 2000s, the Middle East has been going through these massive political upheavals that have been at the mercy of the United States and at the mercy of Israel. After 9/11, the United States has been really just destroying any type of geopolitical threat to Israel that exists in the Middle East. Okay. We invaded Iraq and dismantled the government there. Libya collapsed after NATO intervention during the Obama regime. Syria was already fractured through years of civil war and foreign involvement in those civil war. So when you look at the region today, a lot of the governments that once acted as major independent powers have either been weakened or just completely destabilized or just destroyed. Iran was one of the very few that was still remaining. Okay. It still had a centralized government. It still had a functioning military structure, and it still acted as one of the biggest strategic rivals to Israel in the region. So that alone is a huge reason why Iran had been treated differently in the geopolitical conversation. A lot of times when we hear Israel or the United States talk about threats in the Middle East, what they're really talking about is a power balance. They're saying that the threat is the equality of force that is possible between Iran and between Israel. Okay, Israel deems the country's threat to its existence if that country has the military capabilities to fight a conventional war against Israel. That is a huge factor, and that's really the defining lens when you talk about the Western relationship with the Middle East. You're talking about them, okay? Now, what gets a little bit more interesting is that Israeli leadership, especially with Benjamin Netanyahu, has warned that Iran is close to developing nuclear weapons. Again, that's not a new argument, and there is a very important distinction that sometimes is lost in headlines about Iran engaging in nuclear research for power purposes versus for weapon and arsenal purposes. And nuclear enrichment and nuclear weaponization are two very different things and two very different, or should elicit two very different reactions. Iran has enriched uranium. That's not disputed. Enriched uranium by itself is not a nuclear weapon. It's not a nuclear threat. Turning that material into a functional nuclear warhead is something that's going to require a lot of additional steps, a lot of other engineering and weapon design that international inspectors have repeatedly focused on the distinction between having the uranium for military purposes and having the uranium for potential power purposes. The evidence of a fully active nuclear weapons program that Iran wants to build or anything like that has been contested, and it's really just a worst case interpretation of what nuclear capability could become by saying that Iran has these nuclear capabilities to build bombs and stuff like that. There's no proof that Iran has ever had or will honestly ever have the capacity to build nuclear weapons. That's just not true. That there's no evidence of it. So even if you want to give Israel the benefit of the doubt for God's know what purpose, you'd want to do that. But if you want to give Israel the benefit of the doubt, the reasonable thing is to still understand that this is a lie. It's not true. There is no capacity for Iran to have nuclear weapons. I want to make that very, very clear. What I think is actually ironic, though, is that after, we have these nuclear non-proliferation treaties that go back to the Cold War. These are these treaties that countries have to say, hey, we're not going to keep on building nukes up. And then in case we ever do have a nuclear war, we have so many nukes that we're basically going to destroy the world. Now, Israel on paper is not legally supposed to have nukes, is not legally allowed to have nukes. Okay. And on paper, they also just don't have nukes, but is reason to believe that they do in fact have nuclear capabilities and nuclear weapon capabilities. This goes back to what I just said. Israel finds that if you have an even foothold militarily with them, then that makes you a threat to their existence. So when they're finger pointing at Iran and saying Iran has the ability to build nuclear weapons, they're kind of telling on themselves. They're kind of saying, hey, we don't want them to also have secret nukes like we do. Okay? Because that wouldn't be fair to us. It wouldn't be fair if a political rival had the same type of capability that we have. That is Israel's mindset. That is Israel's goal, if you could say that, okay? Israel has something called a strategic ambiguity, so they will not fully confirm or deny their nuclear arsenal. This is like someone asks you as an individual, hey, do you have a nuclear bomb in your fucking basement? I don't think I want to tell you. That's pretty suspicious. I think that pretty much kind of gives us our answer there, okay? So whether or not Israel has secret nuclear weapons, I think that is more than enough based on their reactions and their lack of oversight for international committees to go in and try to see what they do have. I think it's pretty clear that they probably do have illegal nuclear weapons that they either developed by themselves or maybe were even given to them by the United States illegally. So it's this really strange contradiction that the West kind of puts onto the Middle East, where one country is constantly accused of trying to develop nuclear weapons, and another country is widely believed to already have them. And yet the global narrative in the Western perspective is only to focus primarily on the one side. The really boiling point and the kind of rumor that has been going around as to why Israel and the United States decided to strike Iran recently has been that Israel was actually planning on doing a preemptive nuclear strike on Iran. Now, there's no way to actually confirm whether or not that is the truth, but you have to admit that Iran has been the target of the United States for quite some time. And so you have to think, why did they go in now? Is it because Donald Trump is psychotic enough and so married to Israel and so subservient to Israel that they just can't get away with it now? Or did Israel tell them something and say, hey, Iran's nuclear capabilities were getting too big for their britches or too big for me to be comfortable with them? We're going to just fucking flatten Iran. We're going to fucking glass Iran and kill millions of people in a nuclear attack that then we will somehow say it was a preemptive nuclear attack. Because this is what the strikes were. This is what they're saying about the strikes. They said, oh, we are doing a we are doing a preemptive strike. We're striking them because we want to be safe, because if we don't strike them now, then they could strike us later. I mean, what the fuck is that logic? That logic doesn't make any sense for individuals, let alone countries. Imagine you walking down the street, you see a guy standing at the corner, so you pull out your fucking gun and shoot them in the head. And when the cops come and say, why'd you shoot that guy? They say, well, that was a preemptive strike. I thought that guy could potentially rob me or pull a gun on me, so I went down the street and I shot him. I shot him first. I mean, that's self-defense, right? This is the kind of attitude and that Israel has against its political enemies, and it's something that we have allowed to have happen as the United States. So anyway, talking about the more strikes that are actually have occurred in Iran, obviously as happens with war and stuff like this, there's been civilian infrastructure struck. Probably most notably, there has been a girls' school in Iran that was struck during the initial barrage by Israel in the United States. Obviously, Iran is saying that Israel or the United States was responsible, and Israel is, of course, saying that it was Iran's malfunction or something like that, a military malfunction, that they were trying to shoot back at Israel. Then it actually struck this girls' school, killing hundreds of girls. I mean, okay, the only thing I really have to say about that until we have some sort of international research is just that we've heard that excuse before from Israel with Gaza, where they said back in the day when the Gaza genocide first started, that Israel had bombed a hospital and said, well, no, we didn't bomb the hospital. It was actually a malfunction from a Hamas rocket that bombed the hospital. And then they went on to bomb like every other hospital that existed in the Gaza Strip. So, I mean, you can kind of come to your own conclusion about that one. From when the barrages actually began, doesn't it really make logical sense how Iran was able to even shoot any missiles until after we know that the bomb was already dropped on the school. You can use your own imagination when it comes to that. In situations like this, verifying the truth is extremely difficult because both sides have the potential to be completely biased. Iran had every reason to not say the exact truth all the time because of the fact that they're up against such a big opponent. Israel and the United States have every reason to lie about their intentions to be honest, they're the aggressors in this situation. Like, they are the aggressors in this situation. Iran didn't bomb Israel first. Israel and America bombed Iran first. So it's really hard to see who do we trust in this situation. Every side has incentives to shape the narrative. The only thing that is a certain is that civilians are going to be caught up in the middle of that information war. Commentators and, there have been some commentators and online narratives that have also suggested that the Iranian government could be facing total collapse or destruction. Removing leadership, historically speaking, or even destroying government infrastructure does not automatically mean a country's political system is going to disappear overnight. These kind of leadership decapitation strategies, which is kind of what we saw a little bit in Venezuela, or even then the Venezuelan government is all but the same. It just doesn't have Maduro as the head currently. But those type of leadership decapitation strategies are just going to lead to a power vacuum. We saw that in Iraq. We saw that in Libya. The aftermath of those collapses are still shaping the region today. Very, very tough situation in Iran. I feel mostly for the civilians of Iran because they are in such a harsh predicament where, yes, let's say some of them didn't support the Iranian government. I know I certainly didn't support the Iranian government. However, I don't think that the people who are going to war with the Iranian government give a shit about their Iranian people in any capacity. In fact, I think that they still see them as they see not the government, but the people of Iran as an enemy. And that kind of leads us to talk about probably the most emotionally complex of this situation, which is the reaction among the Iranian diaspora. Okay, so there's many, many Iranians who live abroad who strongly oppose the current government in Tehran. And, for years they've protested the regime, criticized its policies, and kind of called for some long-standing change coming from the Iranian government. So obviously, when we hear about it being bombed and Israel and America bombing it, a lot of Iranian diaspora, especially those living in the United States, are happy. And they're celebrating in the streets that the Iranian government is falling, has been destroyed. Second or third generation Iranian American who's been living in the U.S., I would ask them, there's still families there. There are still communities that live there. Is this what you wanted? Like, is this what your ideal situation would be for the liberation of the Iranian people? Are you happy that the government has been destroyed, even though they've also had, a couple hundred civilian casualties to make that happen? Like, this is just wanton destruction. I mean, this is not a regime change and you're coming in and you're installing a Democratic Party and you're freeing the people, and this is not what's happening. This is just destruction. This is people dying, schools being bombed, people caught in the crossfire. Is that worth celebrating? I don't know. That's the kind of the question I have, because I get you hate the very oppressive theocratic government of Iran, but is your answer then to support Israel, another theocratic oppressive government that may be, in my opinion, just as, if not more radical than the Iranian regime, to be honest with you? People are also just, really worried about the idea of, like, is this going to escalate further? Iran is not a small country that you can just, kill some government officials and the country just falls apart. Whatever the goals of America and Israel are, that's going to determine how much further this escalates. And we're dealing with people who don't know when to stop when it comes to military escalation. They always find an excuse to keep dropping bombs. They always find they always find an excuse to just keep going. And it's like, what is Iran going to look like? Is it going to be another Gaza situation where they keep on saying that, oh, we want to bring the hostages home, and then they bomb and bomb and bomb and kill and kill and kill, and at the end of it, you failed in every aspect. Most of the hostages are dead. Every all the structures in Gaza are destroyed, are we going to see a repeat of that in Iran? Will there be nuclear weapons used? I mean, it's crazy that we're even having this conversation because like a nuclear weapon strike begets all sorts of insane types of shit. I mean, a nuclear strike would destroy not just Iran's potential to grow as a free nation, but it would almost guarantee an escalation of this conflict, probably to global proportions. So I hope at the very least people have some better understanding of this conflict going on in Iran. I will definitely be giving updates about it, but this is a really sad situation for the Iranian people. I don't see how they're going to get out of this situation sooner. The Trump administration was already being in conversation and in negotiation about Iran's nuclear capabilities, and then they just started raining bombs down, destroying all of the negotiation process. So it'll be a really hard thing to see. So I want to thank everybody for listening. I do want to end it there because, I try to talk about entertainment news and stuff like that, but I think it's better to just, because of the heaviness of this topic right now, to just sit back and just let it be what it is. But I hope somebody out there listening to this learned a little something about this, and I'm glad I was able to share my perspective. So I want to thank everybody for listening to the Evil Podcast. This has been You Throw Largely Evil, and I hope you guys have a good one. Talk to you guys later.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Evil Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss another conversation. See you next time.